ancient Athens. We're told it was the birthplace of democracy, where marble gleamed, ideas soared, and freedom echoed through the streets. But that's only half the story. Because if you were poor, Athens didn't feel like a cradle of genius. It felt like cold mornings, cracked stone, and a life measured in debts, not philosophy. Forget the marble columns and painted legends. Most Athenians didn't argue in the agora or dine in marble courtyards. They worked, they worried, they endured. Before we begin, take a quiet moment to like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Now go ahead, adjust your pillows, pull your blanket a little higher, and let the room grow dim. Because where we're headed, the ceilings are low, the fire is faint, and the promise of democracy doesn't warm cold hands. Tonight, we walk softly through the forgotten side of ancient Athens. Not the city of ideas, but the city of survival. Let's begin. Athens. In the 5th century BCE, it was a name that echoed far beyond its borders. At its heart, the Acropolis stood like a monument to the gods, its columns pale and luminous in the sunlight. But few Athenians, especially the poor, ever entered the sacred buildings that crowned it. Instead, they lived below, far from the marble, in neighborhoods crisscrossed with narrow lanes and makeshift walls. Their walls sometimes leaning, their doors opening directly into the street. In the more affluent districts, one might hear the ring of lyres or the philosophical debates drifting from shaded courtyards. But in the poorer quarters, the music was different, and the rare punctuation of festivals or feast days. The poor marked time not with calendars. Dogs barked in the distance. The embers in the hearth glowed faintly red. From higher up the slope, torchlights sometimes flickered, throwing dancing shadows on the walls of poorer homes. In the silence, the uneven balance of Athenian life became most clear gods above, marble shining under moonlight, while below, families slept close together on woven mats, hoping for enough warmth to carry them into morning. But by the arrival of ships in the harbor, the turning of crops, or the return of a neighbor from work, days passed slowly, but not idly. The creak of hand carts, the slap of laundry against flat stones, the rhythmic knock of a loom, these were the everyday instruments of survival. There were few windows, and those that existed were narrow, unglazed, and covered with wooden shutters. Air moved slowly through these spaces. For every statue raised in glory, there was a home patched with straw and hope. For every speech in the assembly, a voice unheard in the alley. In this chapter, we begin to see not only where the poor of Athens lived, but how they moved through a city that admired wisdom and wealth, yet asked the least fortunate to live just outside its gaze. Not unpleasant, but heavy with use. Smoke from hearth fires clung to the walls, mingling with the faint tongue of fermenting wine, or the earthy trace of lentils simmering in cracked pots. In the summer, dust swirled into every crevice. In the winter, the cold crept beneath ill-fitting thresholds, and the scent of damp earth took its place, thick with the smell of ash, olive oil, and bodies that worked from sunrise to sundown. A city admired for its philosophers, poets, and temples. But from the ground, through the eyes of the poor, it was something else entirely. Their games simple stones tossed into lines, or pieces of broken tile stacked into towers. Their laughter was thin, quick to vanish in the stillness of afternoon heat. Older siblings, already helping with chores or trade, moved with the caution of those who understood how fragile things could be. The poor of Athens did not dwell in stories. They lived in the quiet shuffle of daily labor, in the drip of water from a cracked jug, in the low hum of a street corner vendor calling out prices to passers-by who seldom had coins to spare. A place of dust and stone, where grandeur lived just out of reach. The city itself rose unevenly from the landscape. These streets were not paved with order or intention. dirt packed tight by footfall, a pot to mend, a roof to repair before the next storm came. The buildings were simple, often just one or two rooms, built from sun-dried mud brick or rough stone stacked without much symmetry. Over time, the corners crumbled, the plaster flaked away, and repairs were done with whatever could be found, littered with discarded pottery shards, softened only by the worn leather of passing sandals. Chickens roamed freely, scratching at the edges of pathways. Voices echoed between walls built too close together, their sounds soft in the morning, louder by dusk. For those without wealth, the city was not a stage for democracy and glory. It was a landscape of small struggles, a patch of dry earth to sweep. The homes were pressed close together. Life here moved at a different rhythm than the one portrayed in grand oratory or etched in heroic friezes. Even sounds told a story. The smells told their own tale as well. Time in these neighborhoods did not flow evenly. It was shaped by the rising and setting of the sun, the toll of labor. Children played in the alleys. At night, the city quieted but never slept. Athens was a city of greatness, yes, but also of deep contrast. For the poor in ancient Athens, the idea of home was simple, practical, and often fragile. Unlike the grand stone houses of wealthy citizens, these dwellings were modest shelters, built with what was close at hand. Imagine walking through a neighborhood where walls might be rough, uneven, and patched from time to time, each repair a quiet reminder of scarce resources. Most homes were no more than one or two rooms, cramped and close to the street. Their walls were commonly made from sun-baked mud bricks, rough to the touch, sometimes softened by a thin layer of plaster. Over time, that plaster would crack and flake. Most families had a few low benches or wooden stools, worn smooth by years of use. Sounds filtered through the laughter of children playing nearby, the clatter of pots in neighboring kitchens, the distant bleating of goats. The city's pulse was never far, even in the stillest moments. Beds were simple pallets made of woven reeds or straw. Families often shared these small spaces with extended relatives or even lodgers, pressed close together by necessity rather than choice. The scent of burning olive wood mingled with the faint aroma of herbs simmering in a pot. Conversations here were low and measured. They offered a place to lay down burdens each night and to prepare for the struggle that awaited with dawn. In their simplicity, they held the essence of survival, woven through with threads of care, endurance, and the faintest glimmer of hope, voices blending with the crackle of embers. It was in these quiet hours that stories might be shared tales of gods and heroes, or the simple recounting of a day's work. The close presence of others could bring comfort but also tension, especially when the day's fatigue weighed heavily on all. The smell of fresh bread, sometimes baked in communal ovens, mingled with the faint sharpness of herbs. These homes might not have been comfortable by modern standards, but they were the center of daily existence, places of rest, work, and quiet hope, placed directly on the earthen floor or on rough wooden frames. Blankets, when they existed, were thin and often hand-woven from coarse wool, were swept carefully each morning to clear away dust and small debris. Sometimes mats woven from rushes or strips of cloth covered the cold ground, offering a little softness. The texture underfoot was rough but familiar, grounding those who lived there in their daily routines, exposing the raw earth beneath. Roofs were low and covered with overlapping clay tiles, or at times, simply branches and reeds held down by stones. Walls that shielded from rain and wind, a fire to chase away the chill, and spaces shared with those closest. It was a fragile comfort in a city that often seemed too large, too harsh, and too indifferent. Inside, light was limited. Windows, if they existed at all, were narrow openings without glass, covered by wooden shutters or cloth to keep out dust and heat. Instead, it was carried daily from nearby wells or public fountains. Imagine the slow, steady journey, with a heavy clay jar balanced carefully on one shoulder, feet moving over uneven ground, mindful of stones or stray animals. That water was precious, used sparingly for drinking, cooking, and washing. The air was still, thick with the mingling scents of smoke, clay, and the faint trace of olive oil. There were no private latrines within these houses. Instead, many relied on communal facilities or simple pits behind the homes. The smell of earth and distant smoke mingled in the cool morning air. It was a part of daily life, accepted quietly, without complaint. The hearth was the heart of the home, a small stone or clay basin for the fire that warmed the room, cooked the meals, and dried the clothes. Furniture was sparse. Water was not piped into these homes. Sanitation was a challenge. The walls were not just physical barriers, but thin shields against the outside world. At times, the cramped quarters meant privacy was a rare luxury. In cooler months, the hearth fire became a gathering point. Flames flickered against the rough walls, casting soft shadows that danced gently. The floors often bare earth. Despite the hardships, there was a rhythm to life in these homes. Morning light filtered softly through narrow doorways, waking the family with gentle warmth. For the poor of Athens, a home was more than just shelter. It was a small world unto itself. As the sun moved across the sky, these homes stood quietly unyielding, yet vulnerable, mirroring the lives within. In ancient Athens, the simplest necessities could often be the most difficult to secure. For those living without wealth, the daily quest for food was a quiet struggle, shaped by seasons, markets, and the land's generosity. But the bread eaten by the poor was far from the soft loaves depicted in grand feasts or poetic descriptions. Barley, a grain harder and less sweet than wheat, was the common base. Its flour was coarser, the resulting bread denser, often thick and heavy. It was baked in small, communal ovens where families would gather their dough, share warmth, and wait patiently for the slow baking. Bread and olive oil staples in nearly every Athenian meal were at the heart of this challenge. Grains and pulses had to be kept dry and safe from pests. Without proper containers, bags of barley might attract mice or become damp, softening into useless clumps. This quiet menace added to the burden, making each harvest or purchase a fragile hope rather than a secure provision. For the poor, bread was rarely fresh and never lavish. It might be stale before the day's end. Harvests varied with weather. A wet winter could ruin crops, and sudden droughts could turn fields brown and bare. When famine whispered on the horizon, the poor felt it first. Markets would grow silent, prices would rise. The taste might have been plain, but it carried the weight of survival, the rhythm of daily life, and the subtle hope that tomorrow might bring more. And meals became smaller, slower to prepare, dipped carefully into watered-down wine or olive oil to soften its firmness. But in lean times, hunger's presence was a silent companion, felt more than heard, smelled more than seen. It settled in the bones, a quiet reminder that survival depended on the land and luck. A morning might begin with a handful of barley soaked in water, or thin porridge stirred with a wooden spoon. The lingering aroma of barley bread and the faint, oily sheen on a cooking pot told the story of a city sustained not just by its temples and thinkers, but by those who labored quietly to fill empty stomachs. In these simple acts of eating and sharing, a poor found a small measure of comfort amid a world often too harsh to soften. Even the poorest Athenians observed festivals dedicated to Demeter, goddess of grain, offering the little they had in hopes of better harvests. Bread and oil became part of prayers, rituals, and shared meals, binding community and faith. Midday and evening meals usually consisted of lentils, beans, or bitter greens boiled slowly in water. Occasional additions included onions or garlic, lending pungency but little sustenance. Fish, cheese, or meat were rare treats, reserved mostly for festivals or lucky days. Bread, especially, was more than a comfort. It was the foundation of survival. Picture the scent rising from these ovens. A muted warmth, earthy and slightly smoky, mixed with the faint bitterness of burnt crusts. Olive oil, so central to Athenian cuisine, was equally precious. Extracted painstakingly from green and black olives, it was more than a cooking ingredient. It was used for lighting lamps, for bathing, and as an offering to the gods. Yet for those with little, oil was a rationed treasure. A few drops could flavor a stew, or provide a slick sheen to flatbread, but luxury was a distant memory. The daily meals were simple and repetitive. The marketplace, or agora, was a place of constant negotiation. Vendors called out softly, their voices weaving through the hum of the crowd. But for the poor, bargaining was a careful art. Coins were few, and the smallest price difference could decide whether a family ate or went hungry. At times, charity softened the edges, a neighbor sharing olives, a baker slipping an extra crust, but generosity was limited, shaped by each person's own scarcity. Storage was another concern. Food scarcity was often linked to the seasons. In times of plenty, the scent of fresh bread mingled with the sharper tang of vinegar or herbs from nearby stalls. Despite these hardships, food was not only a matter of necessity, but of culture. Each bite taken by a poor family was a small victory, a momentary softness in a day otherwise rough and unyielding. As night fell and the hearth fire flickered low, for the poor of ancient Athens, work was an unceasing rhythm, a slow and steady tide that shaped each day from dawn until dusk. Stonecutters, potters, fishmongers, and street vendors each performed tasks essential to the city's pulse, yet often overlooked in grand accounts of Athenian life. Unlike the leisurely hours imagined in stories of philosophers or the confident speeches in the assembly, potters shaped vessels with practiced hands, their fingers slick and steady. The wheel spun slowly beneath their touch, a gentle hum in the otherwise quiet space. Nearby, blacksmiths hammered iron with measured blows, sparks flying upward only briefly before settling like glowing embers in the dim light. Hours were long, often stretching from first light to late evening, with only brief pauses to rest or eat. The body moved continuously, lifting, bending, carrying, feeling the weight of tools and goods. A potter's workshop might include sons learning the craft alongside their father, the steady shaping of clay connecting generations. Fishmongers shared stalls, voices mingling as they divided catches or counted coins. Tools were set aside, hands wiped clean on rough cloths, and workers gathered near hearth fires or along worn steps. Conversations were low and unhurried, voices blending with the crackle of flames and the distant call of night birds. Even in toil, there was a rhythm to the shared experience. A subtle bond formed in the steady cadence of labor, the resistance of earth or clay, the warmth of the sun and the chill of shade, with the smell of damp earth still lingering in the air. Feet stirred dust along narrow paths, the soft scrape of wooden sandals against packed dirt. Muscles ached beneath roughened skin, clothes became stained with dust or sweat, and small injuries were accepted as part of the routine. There was little time for complaint or rest. The soft glow of morning light on a row of freshly fired pots, the cool splash of water when rinsing hands or tools, the scent of earth after a rare rain. It shaped their bodies, their time, and the very rhythm of their existence. In its steady repetition, there was a quiet dignity, a perseverance that carried on, unseen by many, but essential to the life of the city itself. These small details offered a gentle counterpoint to the strain, a reminder that life continued in all its complexity. Survival depended on continued effort, calling out prices with a calm cadence that blended into the city's morning song. The goods smelled fresh but earthy, sun-warmed olives, bright green herbs, and the faint saltiness of the sea. The faint murmur of neighbors, preparing for the day's work, mingled with the distant bleating of goats or the low cluck of chickens, heavy with the scent of tilled soil and growing crops. Hands grasped stalks of wheat or pulled at stubborn roots, the texture rough against calloused palms. The steady rhythm of planting or harvesting was broken only by the occasional crow of a distant rooster or the rustle of dry leaves. The labor of those without wealth was practical, repetitive, and demanding. Many poor Athenians found themselves in trades that required hands and bodies more than words or ideas. The morning might begin before the sun had fully risen. In workshops, the air was thick with the scent of wet clay and burning charcoal. Street vendors arranged simple wares, fruits, vegetables, small fish on woven mats or wooden stands. Their voices were low and soft. For those who labored in the fields beyond the city walls, work began with the cool morning air. Yet despite the variety of work, common threads ran through each task. The weariness was quiet, but persistent. In the city, the work was often closely tied to community and family. Sometimes, the day's work offered brief moments of quiet beauty. As evening approached, the city's noises softened. Work did not define all of life, but for the poor of Athens, it was the frame upon which their days were built. Clothing in ancient Athens spoke quietly of one's place in the world. For the wealthy, finely woven robes and dyed fabrics reflected status and wealth. But for the poor, clothing was practical. A simple tunic fashioned from rectangular pieces of fabric folded and pinned over the shoulders. For the poor, these were usually made from coarse wool or linen, fabrics that were sturdy but rough against the skin. The colors were muted off whites, grays, and bronze dyes were rare or expensive, so garments often carried the natural hues of their fibers. Often worn thin by time and toil, made from materials that spoke more of necessity than style. Often hand-me-downs from older siblings, their sizes stretched or altered to fit smaller frames. Tunics were sometimes tucked or tied to allow freer movement for work or play. Sleeves might be rolled or pinned back when tasks required more dexterity. Belts or cords cinched waists, keeping garments secure as people moved through daily chores. Their garments bore the marks of play patches from scrapes or tears, faint stains from earth and food, softened edges from constant movement. Each stitch, patch, and fold was a small act of care, a way to stretch scarce resources, to hold on to what was necessary. And missed payments sometimes led to escalating obligations. The burden could grow slowly, like a vine wrapping tighter with each season, tracked in memory or on scraps of wax tablets. The process was slow, steady, and without fanfare, much like the lives of those it affected, threatening to choke the borrower's chances of recovery. A constant reminder that survival required careful planning, resilience, and sometimes sacrifice. It shaped lives quietly, like the steady passage of days marked by the turning of seasons and the soft fading of light. The hope of a good harvest, a steady wage, unseen but present, an invisible thread woven through the fabric of everyday existence. Or a successful market day was never far from the mind of those trying to stay afloat, and to present oneself with as much dignity as circumstances allowed. In some cases, debtors who could not repay found themselves at risk of losing their land, tools, or even their freedom. A quiet network woven from trust and necessity. Still, the social stigma of debt was real, and many struggled in silence, careful to keep their difficulties private. Spending had to be measured carefully. Every coin saved or spent was part of a delicate balance. Luxury was out of reach, and even basic comforts required negotiation with reality. Families might eat less or wear older clothes to stretch resources, always mindful of the unseen weight growing just beyond the next day. The practice of debt bondage existed. The scent of fresh bread, the warmth of the hearth, and the sounds of children playing offered moments of respite from the quiet strain. In these pauses, the hope for release from debt, however distant, remained a comforting thought. where a person might work for their creditor to repay what was owed, often under difficult conditions. Though not widespread, it was a reminder of the fragility beneath the city's democratic ideals. Many poor Athenians went barefoot during warm months. Washing was done carefully and sparingly, often by hand at communal wells or riversides. It was a quiet language of survival and identity. Those in need might turn to wealthy citizens, moneylenders, or even neighbors, agreeing to repay sums with interest. Coins exchanged hands quietly, under the watchful eyes of witnesses. Contracts, often oral, carried serious consequences, even if written records were rare. Woven through with the rhythms of daily life, especially for those without wealth. It was not a loud or dramatic force, but a steady weight, pressing gently yet persistently on the shoulders of the poor. For many, the need to borrow was an everyday reality. Food, tools, or even shelter often required credit, with the promise of repayment that could be difficult to fulfill. For the poor of Athens, garments carried the softness of worn threads and the faint scent of earth and sweat, binding body and spirit in a continuous embrace. The scent of sun-dried fabric. These simple clothes moved through the streets and workshops, marketplaces and homes, whispering stories of endurance beneath the grand shadows of marble columns. Mingled with faint traces of olive oil or herbs used in cleaning, lingered quietly. After washing, garments were draped over low walls or branches, catching soft breezes that carried the salty tang of the nearby sea, feeling the earth and stone beneath their feet. Their rough texture providing a small barrier against chill winds that swept through narrow streets and open markets. The fabric's weight pulled gently, comforting in its warmth, though it could never fully guard against the sharpness of winter. When sandals were worn, they were simple strips of leather, fastened with cords, offering only the most basic protection from rough ground. The soles were thin, worn smooth by many steps through dusty streets or muddy paths. The basic garment for most Athenians was the chiton. Imagine the texture of such clothing, the scratchiness of wool, especially in colder months, pressing against the skin. Linen's lighter weave, more breathable but less durable, worn thin at the edges. Stains from daily work, patches sewn on with rough thread, and frayed hems were common. These signs of wear told a quiet story of repeated mending and careful preservation. Footwear was minimal. Clothing was not frequently changed. In colder months, heavier cloaks called himatians were wrapped tightly around the body. These were often made from thicker wool. Children's clothing was similarly simple. At times, clothing also held practical uses beyond covering the body. The lack of elaborate decoration or luxury materials was a constant reminder of economic limits. Yet, within these simple garments, there was also resilience. In this way, clothing became more than fabric. As the city's light shifted with the passing hours, debt was a quiet shadow that stretched across many lives in ancient Athens. The system of loans was simple yet unyielding. Interest rates could be high. One of the harsh realities of debt was its impact on personal freedom. Neighbors and family members sometimes stepped in to help, offering small loans or sharing resources. This informal support was a lifeline. Markets and workshops hummed with the subtle presence of credit. Goods might be given in advance, with the expectation of payment later. Small debts accumulated quietly. The burden of debt influenced daily choices. Despite these pressures, life continued in its gentle rhythms. Debt was, in many ways, a silent companion to poverty in Athens. It was not marked by sudden crises, but by a slow, persistent tightening. As the city's streets grew still and the night air cooled, the weight of debt rested with its holders. In the bustling city of Athens, where marble temples and grand public spaces spoke of power and culture, the homes of the poor were often modest, tucked away in narrow lanes and crowded quarters. For those without wealth, housing was a matter of practicality and survival rather than comfort or style. Most poor Athenians lived in small, simple houses or apartments clustered tightly together. A single room often served multiple purposes: cooking, sleeping, working, and socializing. The floor was packed earth or simple stone slabs, sometimes covered with woven mats or animal hides. Furniture was sparse: a few stools, low tables, and storage chests made from rough-hewn wood. The weight of these vessels was felt keenly with each step, a reminder of the labor woven into basic survival. Storage for water and food was limited. Children played in shared courtyards or along narrow streets, their laughter rising softly above the city's quieter moments. These small spaces fostered connections, as neighbors exchanged news, shared meals, or offered help during hardships. Perishables had to be consumed quickly, while grains and pulses were kept in small sacks or jars. Dampness settled into walls during rainy seasons, carrying a chill that seeped into bones. Barley's texture was coarse, its flavor earthy and mild. It was a reliable grain, able to grow in rocky soil and harsh conditions, but it lacked the richness of wheat, which was more prized and often reserved for those with more means. When available, they were modest in quantity and shared carefully. The saltiness of cured fish or the faint scent of grilled meat offered a brief contrast to the everyday meal as usual simplicity. Often, protein came from legumes, which were both nourishing and affordable. Between tasks or at the end of a long day's work, families gathered in modest homes, sharing what they had in quiet companionship. The sound of soft chewing and the occasional murmur of conversation filled the space, a steady backdrop to evening's close. But prices fluctuated, and not all could afford the best, or even enough. Bartering and credit might stretch supplies, but these were fragile lifelines. The poor learned to make use of what was available: stale bread turned into porridge, vegetable scraps saved for broth, and small portions carefully measured. In hotter months, the sun baked the city's stones, and the cramped quarters offered little refuge from the heat. The act of sharing a meal, no matter how simple, carried a quiet dignity. It was a moment of rest, a chance to gather strength, and a reminder that life continued in its steady flow. There were times when food was scarce, when the stores ran low or the harvest was poor. Food, though modest and sometimes elusive, remained a vital thread in the fabric of daily existence, nourishing bodies, binding families, and quietly sustaining hope. The pang of emptiness was a quiet ache, a reminder of vulnerability. Children might go to bed with less than a full stomach, and adults sometimes worked through the discomfort to provide what they could, not only for cooking, but also for dipping bread or dressing salads. Its gentle, fruity aroma was familiar and comforting. Sometimes a splash of vinegar or a sprinkle of fresh herbs would add brightness to a modest meal, small gestures that elevated the daily fare. These were often cooked slowly in clay pots over gentle flames, filling homes with the warm, soothing aroma of simmering food. The smell of dried herbs, oregano, thyme, and coriander might mingle softly in the air, lending subtle flavor to simple dishes, more as a beverage of habit than indulgence. Sweetness was rare. Honey was expensive and used sparingly, if at all. The constant presence of so many people in tight spaces increased the risk of illness, a subtle, ever-present concern. These structures were often built of sun-baked clay bricks or rough stone, with wooden beams supporting flat or gently sloping roofs. The walls were thick but unadorned, designed to shield inhabitants from the summer heat and winter chill. The narrow lanes of Athens rested under a gentle sky, where the homes of the poor stood quietly, humble shelters against the vastness of the ancient world. Imagine walking down a narrow alleyway, unlike the banquets and abundant tables of the wealthy. Daily meals for those with little meant simple ingredients, modest portions, and sometimes uncertainty. Eating was a quiet, constant challenge, shaped by the rhythms of work, the seasons, and the limited resources available, and found comfort in routine. The walls, though plain, held stories of endurance, hope, and the unspoken strength of those who lived within them. Where the air is thick with the faint smell of dust, cooking fires, and damp stone, clothes might hang from thin lines stretched between buildings, swaying gently in a light breeze. Flames flickered softly, casting warm light and gentle shadows on the walls. The scent of wood smoke mixed with the aroma of cooking food, lentils simmering, onions slowly softening, or bread baking on hot stones. These scents wove together into a quiet tapestry of daily life. The muted murmur of voices, footsteps on uneven cobblestones, and the occasional clatter of a small clay pot create a steady background hum. Inside these homes, space was limited and carefully divided. Heating came from small hearths built into one corner of the room. Privacy was a luxury rarely afforded. Walls were thin, and sounds traveled easily between neighboring rooms and homes. Conversations, laughter, and sometimes quarrels blended into a constant, soothing background. Families often slept close together on mats or simple beds, the shared warmth easing the chill of cool nights. Water was fetched daily from communal wells or fountains, carried in clay jars or leather bags. The cramped nature of housing affected more than just comfort. It shaped social interactions, weaving neighbors into a close, if sometimes strained, community. Yet, the lack of space and resources also brought challenges. Still, within these modest homes, life unfolded in all its quiet complexity. Families celebrated small occasions, cared for one another. As night deepened, the city's lights dimmed and the sounds softened. For the poor people of ancient Athens, food was often a careful balance between scarcity and necessity. The staple of many meals was barley, humble and filling, used to make porridge or flat bread. Vegetables were gathered or grown where possible. Lentils, chickpeas, onions, and garlic added variety and sustenance. Fish and occasional small portions of meat were rare treats for the poor. Olive oil was a valued ingredient. Water was the primary drink for most, its coolness a relief from the heat of the sun. Occasionally, diluted wine might appear at the table. Meals were often eaten quickly, yet hunger was never far from many tables. The city's markets bustled with activity. Despite these challenges, food was also a source of connection and comfort. As night settled softly over Athens, the smell of cooked grain and herbs lingered in humble homes. In ancient Athens, the rhythm of daily life for the poor was set by work. Labor was constant and often demanding, shaping not only the body, but the very hours of each day. For many, the sun's first light was a call to begin, and only after the last tasks were done could rest come. During planting and harvest, the poor might labor in fields surrounding the city, bent low to till the soil or gather crops. The sun warmed the earth, and the smell of freshly turned soil mingled with the faint scent of wild herbs carried on the breeze. Their days were marked by the smell of burning oil lamps, the soft clatter of pottery, and the smooth surfaces of polished floors. The heat of midday was met with shade under olive trees or the cool stone of shaded courtyards. Boys might apprentice with craftsmen, learning trades slowly and carefully. Girls helped in homes or markets, their small hands already familiar with the tasks of daily life. Education for the poor was limited. Much was learned through observation and participation, were marked not only by labor and limited resources, but also by the fragile nature of health, practiced mostly at home or by a handful of healers. Muscle strains, cuts, and bruises were frequent companions. Infections, though not visible in detail, could quietly worsen, turning minor injuries into more serious concerns. The texture of healing wounds, bathing, when possible, took place in communal baths or at the river, where the cool water could wash away the dust and weariness of the day. The sensation of water flowing over sun-warmed skin was a brief relief in an often harsh world. The coolness of clean water on skin, or the warmth of a bandage, provided temporary comfort. Fragile lives, shaped by hardship and hope, moved gently toward sleep carrying with them the quiet strength to face another day. Remedies drew from natural ingredients, herbs, oils, and simple poultices applied with care, but limited by knowledge. Many children faced risks from malnutrition, infectious diseases, and the general hardships of life. The loss of young lives was a silent sorrow woven into families and neighborhoods. Mothers and fathers cared with whatever means they had, though their effects were profound. Lives were lost, and the balance of families and labor was unsettled. These times brought a hush over the city, a pause in the usual rhythms as the living adjusted to absence and uncertainty, soothing fevered brows with cool cloths and whispering soft reassurances. The scent of dried herbs, bitter and earthy, often filled the rooms where the sick were tended. The resilience of the human spirit showed in quiet moments, the touch of a caring hand, the sharing of food, the gentle attentions to the ill. These treatments offered small relief, a gentle easing rather than cure. Without the comforts of modern medicine, illness and injury quietly shaped daily existence, often in ways both subtle and profound. The simple diet, though sustaining, sometimes lacked essential nutrients. This led to subtle weaknesses, a quiet fatigue, and vulnerability. The body's resilience depended heavily on the steady availability of food, rest, and care luxuries, often in short supply. The body, like the city around it, was vulnerable to the wear of time, the strain of work, and the unseen forces of disease. Sweat mingled with the dusty air, a quiet testament to effort. Despite fatigue, the laborers persisted, but also minds accustomed to steady persistence. The quiet rhythm of daily tasks, repeated season after season, created a backdrop against which the city's grander events unfolded, driven by necessity and the faint hope that each day's toil might bring some small improvement. Though less physically demanding than other tasks, this work required constant attention and careful obedience. This work was both familiar and relentless, tied to nature's slow, steady cycle. Payment was sometimes given in coin, but could also be paid in kind food, shelter, or goods. The unpredictability of work meant that income was irregular. The fading light softened the edges of the day's weariness, blending it into the calm of evening. Work had shaped the day, and rest awaited under the gentle quiet of the night, forcing many to find multiple jobs or rely on informal arrangements. The work itself was varied, yet commonly marked by routine, physical effort, and the simple tools of the trade. Many poor Athenians found employment as craftsmen, artisans, or laborers. Stonecutters and potters shaped raw materials into useful objects, their hands coated in dust or clay. The rough texture of stone chips under fingers, the cool, slick feel of wet clay, the faint sound of a hammer tapping, these were the sensations that accompanied their days. Other work was seasonal. In the city, many served as porters or dock workers. The heavy weight of crates, the rough rope fibers chafing hands, the salty air thick with the smell of fish and seaweed. These defined a laborious day at the busy harbor. The noise of creaking wood and lapping waves was constant, a backdrop to the unceasing work of loading and unloading. Some found work as domestic servants, cleaning, cooking, or tending to wealthier households. Wages were modest, often barely enough to meet basic needs. Work hours were long, from dawn until dusk, with brief pauses to eat or rest. For children, work began early as well. In this cycle of work and rest, the poor of Athens lived lives marked by routine and resilience. The physicality of labor-shaped bodies hardened by effort. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the city, laborers left their tools and returned home. The lives of the poor in ancient Athens, healthcare in Athens, was a modest affair. The poor, whose daily life involved constant physical effort and exposure to the elements, were particularly susceptible to ailments. Childhood was a delicate time. Hygiene, while practiced, was constrained by the environment. Access to clean water was limited, and crowded living conditions made the spread of illness easier. Periods of epidemic disease swept through communities quietly. Nutrition also affected health. Despite these challenges, there was endurance. Families adapted, communities supported one another, and life continued in its slow, steady flow. As night deepened, the flicker of oil lamps cast soft light on resting faces, and the city's sounds softened to a whisper. As we come to the close of this journey through the lives of the poor in ancient Athens, it is worth pausing to reflect on the quiet struggles that defined their days. Life for those without wealth was shaped by constant challenges, from the weight of debt and the cramped homes to the simple meals and the demanding labor. Yet beneath these hardships was a steady rhythm, a persistent flow of daily life that continued much as it always had. The narrow lanes of Athens held homes filled with modest sounds, the soft murmur of conversation, the clinking of simple pottery, and the muted footsteps on worn stone. The air carried gentle scents, the earthiness of barley porridge. The past, with all its challenges and quiet moments, offers a soft illumination. It invites us to rest, to reflect, and to find peace in the steady flow of life, just as the people of ancient Athens once did, in their humble homes under the fading light of day. Its grand temples and bustling agora stood alongside humble homes and worn streets. The democratic ideals that inspired participation and citizenship were not always reflected in the lives of those who struggled quietly in its shadows. Still, the city's life was made whole by the presence of all its people, each contributing in their way to the ongoing story. The faint smoke of hearth fires, there is a gentle reminder of the passage of time and the endurance of the human spirit. Their experiences, though distant and different, resonate softly with universal themes: survival, community, hope, and the search for a place to belong, and the subtle fragrance of herbs drying on windowsills. These details, quiet and unassuming, reveal the texture of everyday existence. Though the poor faced many difficulties, the insecurity of borrowed coins, the vulnerability of health, and the scarcity of food, they also forged bonds of community and resilience. Neighbors shared small kindnesses, families found comfort in shared spaces, and children's laughter echoed softly in crowded courtyards. In these moments, the weight of hardship was balanced by the warmth of human connection. Ancient Athens was a city of contrasts. In considering the lives of Athens' poor, as the night deepens and the city rests beneath a vast and tranquil sky, these stories settle quietly into memory. The lives of those who toiled and dreamed, who lived with scarcity yet carried on, are part of the fabric of history, woven with subtle threads of endurance, woven with calm resilience. So, as we drift toward rest ourselves, we carry with us a sense of gentle understanding,